Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth.
That's right. Hello, you good people. Welcome to Life on Earth.
Hello.
Today is February 3rd, 2022, the most meaningful episode of this show ever. It's chock full of meaning. It's coming out the edges of the screen. It is full to the brim. And I'll tell you why. Bodies in the chat. So cool. We've got folks already talking about going to England. If you heard the pre-show here, Tal Safani and with Razi and Nikos talking about new stuff coming to the week in London, including the Happiness Team. How great is that going to be? Bonnie, hope you get a chance to make that. I know passport quickness is going to be an issue. Life on Earth, February 3rd. It's all about meaning. And the reason is, there's about 10 reasons, aren't there always? Mm-hmm. The reason is a dear friend of mine had posted a post on the social networks about the Jordan Peterson appearance on Joe Rogan. Now, this wasn't about Neil Young saying, I don't want to be on Spotify because Joe Rogan's on there. Or Joe Rogan saying, I don't know what's wrong with the kind of people I have on and the crazy stuff they say. Now, I believe me, I would love to spend a whole episode picking on all sides, both sides, all four sides, the insides, the outsides of that. But no, a dear friend posted and said, that January 25th appearance, Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan's Experience, there was a segment in which he talked about nihilism, or sometimes he'll say nihilism, and the meaning of life, with the implication that if you don't find a transcendent meaning, a rational meaning, there is no meaning. Now, in addition to this, Yaron Brook on January 30th on the Yaron Brook Show discussed this Peterson appearance on Joe Rogan. He talked about capitalism, which Jordan Peterson is often pretty good on. I put a link to the Yaron Brook Show just in case you missed it in the show notes that you can, it's already linked to my socials, but don't look at it now, keep listening. We will get into that too. Because as interesting as that discussion was, I think there's more value for us, for me, for you guys, for you.
Oh, thank you. I know you've got a great show lined up, so I can't wait to hear it.
I think there's more value in discussing this. And so I'm going to do a first time ever. Amy and I are going to do a first time ever reaction video.
Ooh, let's do it. I'm gonna make funny faces. Means. Can I make little things like this? And
yes, you can react in whatever manner you find rationally appropriate. This is going to be good. Now, I did a ton of prep for this, so here we're going to get started with Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan, because he's getting spooky. In fact, when Yaron Brook did his show, I got on the chat because I had to vent. I said, Jordan Peterson is getting spooky. He's constructed a unique, wholly personal map of the world in which his concepts and narratives, he uses these words, narratives, a lot, transcends metaphysics, the real world stuff.
Transcends metaphysics.
Yes, truth, capital T truth, the kind of truth he talks about with Sam Harris, which doesn't seem to relate to what any of us mean by truth at all. Mm-hmm. Truth becomes a noumenal abstraction with primacy over the physical world. Small wonder then that he sees higher truths as manifestations. You'll hear him talk about manifestations. So I'm going to get started. Let me go to the first clip. There are a few of these. The first clip, Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan.
Well, now, before you get into that, you're going to be talking quite a bit about the purpose of life, or the meaning of life.
Yes, well, yes. Jordan Peterson is going to be talking about the meaning of life.
Okay.
He's looking for it. He wants it.
He is looking for it?
Don't we all want it?
We do want to know what the meaning of life
is.
He's
finding it elusive, and he's finding it in strange places, and we need to talk about that because this is going to pay off for all of us.
Okay.
Once we get it right. So here we go. Let me
so we're talking about freedom.
Wait a minute. Let me hit my screen sharing. Then you're going to do the technical stuff here. And you should now see my media player.
So we're talking about freedom. It's like, okay, freedom. It's freedom from constraint is freedom. All right, fine. Let's play a game. You want to play this game? Sure. Okay. You move first. What do you mean? That's the game. You can do anything you want. You move first. You think that's not much of a game? It's like, no, it's the perfect game. You're absolutely free to do anything you want.
Okay.
Well, everybody does what you did. You just sit there. The right amount of rules for freedom is not zero.
The right amount of rules for freedom is not zero. Now, did you think I was exaggerating when I suggested Jordan Peterson hasn't quite got the relationship between the metaphysical and the man-made right?
I can kind of see that.
Let's play a game and go ahead. You go first. There are no rules. There are no constraints.
You know what I'd start be doing? Like if I was interviewing, I'd be like, round robin.
See, you would have started playing. You would have known, and you would have just inferred that the rules that he's claiming don't exist are the facts of reality.
What? Wait, there's facts of reality that you can logically deduce and induce and
yeah, there's still all of that out there. Even if nobody forces you, there's still the world.
Oh, whoa.
Yes. The right amount of rules for freedom is not zero. Well, freedom what? Freedom from the facts of reality? Yes, the right amount of rules for freedom from the facts of reality is not zero. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. It has political implications, but as we learned on the Yaron Brooks show, Peterson is better than a lot of these intellectuals when it comes to capitalism. He has some idea of free markets and so I'm not going to get into that.
But we're kind of doing a philosophical detection episode, aren't we?
We are. We're back to philosophical detection like we talked about with James Stevens Valiant. But here's why I wanted to start with that clip, which is a good 55 minutes into the show. Let's go to clip number 2 here.
So, and I think this is modeled by music. This is really worth knowing. This like almost took the top of my head off when I realized it. And it took me about 4 months of thinking to figure this out. Because when I was in graduate school at McGill, I became really interested in the reality of evil. And I was very interested in the viability of nihilistic beliefs. You know, why bother if everything's going to disappear in 100 years? Who cares?
The viability of nihilistic beliefs.
Really?
Now, this is important. You laugh.
I know.
But you shouldn't laugh.
I know.
Because I went through this.
I know.
You probably went through
I'm
this.
sure. I know.
A lot of us went through that existential angst, especially if you were brought up with some kind of supernatural tradition. For most people, it was religion. For most in America, it was Christianity. And then you were told that stuff that you've been told all these years gives your life meaning and gives you an existence beyond death. Take all that away and what's left? We'll answer that question, but to some people and to some of us, we spent some time thinking, well, all that other stuff was like really big and really grand and really gave me a sense of, you know, even if this life isn't that good, it's going to be good. So when Jordan Peterson says something like, well, you know, why bother if everything's going to disappear in 100 years? Who cares? It sounds silly to you. It sounds silly to me. Until I think, well, no, man, we've been through that stuff.
I mean, is that, I mean, are you talking about like teasing out the idea of an afterlife kind of thing or
something transcendent? Even if you leave out the supernatural, how many people tell you a great life is a life with a purpose beyond yourself? You need to find a purpose bigger than yourself.
Right.
So go to clip number 3 here.
Life, you know, it's meaningless. In the final analysis, life is meaningless.
Right.
Okay, well, you know, you can make a credible case for that. Now, it's a upsetting case because once you accept that, first of all, you're anxious and hurt by it. So that's not so good. And second, it kind of makes you aimless. And that's part of nihilism. It's like, you know, you're anxious and upset, but you're also aimless because why bother?
I'm never aimless. I'm
well,
Amy.
You're never aimless, that's for sure.
So no, I get it. I mean, you know, I used to think as a teenager, you know, you know, why love, why value? There's no hope in it because you're just going to lose out. You're just going to be disappointed because everyone's a sheeple, right?
Right. And that point you make that, oh, everybody's just sheeple. There's no reason for that kind of negativity to be brought in, but if you are already negative, if you've already got some baggage. Well, we'll see where that gets you here.
Okay.
But then I thought, well, when that gets out of hand, maybe you're nihilistic because you're mortal and life ends in death. So you're sort of nihilistic because of suffering. And so then you become nihilistic as a logical response to that. And then what happens?
Well, you got a chip on your shoulder. That's what happens. That's why you're nihilistic. I think he's right about that. Although that's not quite how he meant it.
Nihilistic people definitely make suffering worse. Definitely. They make it worse for themselves, for sure.
Sure.
But then they get bitter because their lives are so unbearable, and then they start to take it out on other people. So if you are nihilistic, that's not neutral. It gets bad real fast.
Right.
Okay.
But remember, he's implying that nihilism isn't just a sense of life, angry, negative personality.
Mm-hmm.
Nihilism to Jordan Peterson is existentialism. It is letting go of the supernatural or the transcendent. It's that default state of, I don't have any meaning beyond myself.
So really you can't have values unless you have something to transcend into or be a bigger part of.
Or you need to connect to, well, let's see what you need to connect to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, are there any antidotes to meaninglessness?
Good.
And rational antidotes are hard to come by, because you can just say, well, who cares if in 1,000 years we're all going to be dead? Why get out of bed in the morning?
I have to pause that, even though I intentionally broke it up the way I did. I've got to stop there. Rational antidotes are hard to come by. Why are rational antidotes hard to come by? He says, because people, you can just say, well, who cares if in 1,000 years we're all going to be dead? Oh, here, I'll let him say it.
Okay.
You can't really mount a rational case why that's not reasonable. Now, I'm not saying it is reasonable, but I thought about music.
Now, again, he says, you can't really mount a rational case why this nihilism, this angst, this existential feeling of dread is not reasonable. And then he says, well, I'm not saying it's reasonable, but then he goes on. Now this gets interesting. Just listen to this.
But I thought about music. Music is a very strange art form. I had a great journalist friend of mine. He said to me the other day, he said, all art aspires to the condition of music, which I thought was great. But music, you think about the revitalizing effect music continues to have in our culture, especially among young people. And that's really, really been the case since the beginning of the 60s. It's like we got more nihilistic and less religious and all of that as our culture became more secular and more rational, more materialistic. And at the same time, the power of music as a cultural phenomenon just grew and grew and grew and grew. So music gives you the intimation of meaning, right, directly. So
now, just in case you thought I was exaggerating by saying nihilism to Jordan Peterson and to people in this intellectual belief, it's not just that nihilism is I'm angry, I'm bitter, I'm negative. It's nihilism is what you are left with when you let go of religion and embrace rationality. You can't get much more explicit than his interpretation of history here. We got more nihilistic and less religious and all that as our culture became more secular and more rational, more materialistic. And then he says, at the same time, the power of music as a cultural phenomenon just grew and grew and grew and grew. And then you heard the line. Think about this for a second. Music gives you the intimation of meaning. Remember, folks like Jordan here talk about things manifesting. Music gives you an intimation. It makes an intimate, it whispers in your ear. There's something more. There is something to embrace.
Mm.
Tell
me if you think I'm exaggerating here.
I used to watch punk rockers. I went to a Ramones concert once, which was really fun. It's a flat place, and all these punks were down there smashing into each other and doing this really rough dance. And I thought, this is so cool. We got all these nihilistic punks in here, like half beating themselves up, dancing, and being taken in by this rough music. that gave them, even in their aggressive nihilism, a sense of meaning. I thought that was so cool. So why does music do that? That's a good question, because
why does music do that? Why does music give these poor nihilists a sense of meaning? Well, I know what my answer is. I would say, well, I won't say. I'm going to hold off. I'm going to hold off on my explanation because this gets really good.
So let's think about what music is. First of all, it's a pattern. So non-pattern music is noise. It's a pattern. But then it isn't one pattern. It's multiple patterns layered on top of one another in a harmonious manner, and in a manner that indicates, in some sense, communication between all the patterned layers, because they have to go together.
Now, a communication there is important. He doesn't just say all of the elements of music have to work together.
Mm.
They actually communicate with each other. Now, think about that. It's an interesting metaphor for what a composer does when he puts music together, or what a band does when they play music together, that there's communication between the different themes and elements and harmonies and melodies and rhythms, but they're not actually communicating with each other. And so you would think Jordan Peterson is using that metaphorically, right?
And so what's the world? Well, the world's made of objects. It's like, no, it's not. It's made of patterns. So music is just like the world, because the world's made of patterns.
We sometimes laugh when in philosophy, in objectivism, there are people who say, the philosophers of old would tell us there are no entities, there are only the relationships between entities, but there's no entities. And we say, well, nobody believes that since the Greeks. Nobody in modern times actually believes, oh yeah, there's no things, there's just the relationships between things. And then somebody like Jordan Peterson says, and so what's the world? Well, the world's made of objects? No, it's not. It's made of patterns.
Yeah, so it's made of rationalistic constructs. I mean, it's just
and you think he doesn't really mean that literally. But then listen to him talk about history. Listen to him talk about religion. Mm-hmm. Read 12 Rules for Life and look at where he derives that from.
So for him, patterns also are very similar to narratives or stories or biblical tales.
They would be, but narratives and stories are real. To him, narratives and stories are metaphysical. And the objects like you and me and the chair and the table and the screen and the camera and the internet, those have less reality or a lower reality or no reality versus the relationship between them all.
Mm.
Again, you think I'm exaggerating, but
I know you're not exaggerating.
And then music has layered patterns that are all moving together in a harmonious manner. And so what do you do when you hear that, especially if it's got a beat? Well, then you move your body, and you want to, right? The music calls to you to move your body. So now you're moving your body in sync with the patterned layers of the world. That's meaning. And then there's more to it. So that's so cool, is music is an analog of the structure of existence.
Wait.
Now, I'm pausing this halfway through this clip because you wonder what's the motivation?
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Peterson is enormously successful. He's extremely intelligent.
Right.
He's also a man who's been through hell and back. Why do I mention that? I'll tell you why I mention that. Actually, I'll let you figure out why I mention that.
And it calls to you to take part in that. And so maybe you dance by yourself, or maybe even better, you dance with someone else. And so then you both bring your bodies into this patterned relationship with this multi-layer harmony together in a spontaneous way, indicating that you can both play and are therefore potentially trustworthy future mates.
Back to the lobsters.
Back to the lobster. Exactly. Exactly. So maybe you dance by yourself.
Evolution. It's all.
Or maybe even better, you dance with someone else. And so you bring your bodies into this patterned relationship. Remember, the relationships are more important than the entities. With this multi-layer harmony together in a spontaneous way, indicating that you can both play and are there for potentially trustworthy future mates. Did this poor kid get like kicked off the playground when he was a kid? Was he picked last for dodgeball? Incidentally, I'm one of those people who was often picked last for dodgeball. I know that feeling. What did Jordan Peterson go through to put this kind of universe, this map of meaning together?
What does he think epistemology is? How does he think that we know? I mean, and how do we absorb patterns? You know, is it just instinctual?
Well, through the application of our intellect. But the question is, what do we know? You know, he knows that there are trains and planes and automobiles, but what matters, what has primacy, are the identifications of those patterns. And unfortunately, not everybody can do that, but Jordan can do that for us.
When you're talking about just relationships between things or relationship between patterns or constructs or whatever,
yes,
it's very deductive thinking. There is no, what are you inducing from where?
Well, for induction, you would have to go to, well, I think you'd have to go to the cloud.
The cloud?
The patterns, the relationships, because, you know, the problem of induction hasn't been solved yet.
Oh.
So that's all very suspicious anyway. I have one more clip to play.
Okay.
That's really going to get me where I want to go here. And then I will read a few things that might help us get our feet back on the ground.
Okay, good.
But I'm going to take a quick look at the chat. For example, Apollo Zeus says he sounds like he's suffered a psychological breach. Well, he's admitted that, but it would be rude of us to say that's what's informing this discussion until we prove it, which we will. Not a psychological breach, but I'm telling you, he is bringing baggage into this discussion that he essentially tells you, you know, what that baggage is without, of course, saying, well, that's why I think what I do. One more clip is going to make that clear. But again, I just want to take a quick look at the chat. Now, we are on the Ayn Rand Center UK channel, growing by leaps and bounds. Big conference coming up starting on March. Well, it was March 28th. Now it's going back to March 27th. It keeps getting bigger. You know, it started out as the April 1st through 3rd Ayn Rand Institute, Ayn Rand Con Europe.
Right.
Well, if you're going to do that where the Ayn Rand Center UK is, Ayn Rand Center UK is going to add on to that. The whole pre-week is now full. And they just announced, Tal Stefani and Nikos and Razi announced that they're going to do a happiness team project in association with Tal Stefani's happiness teams at the beginning of the week, which takes us from Monday back all the way into Sunday. Just gets better and better. But here's the point. Any super chats you put in, if you hit the $ on the YouTube, you put in a super chat, not only does it stand out and give us the warm and fuzzies, but it's going to help support all of these activities. You should be in London that week. We're planning to be in London that week.
Yes, we are.
But even if you can't, you can support the channel, support ARC UK.
Yes.
Also, if you want to become a member, which incidentally you need to do at the 2nd tier or higher in order to get access to the Happiness Team Project in London, go to aynrandcenter.co.uk and you can become a member right there. Now you're eligible. Now you get access to all that happiness, all that goodness.
Awesome.
Happiness being a higher level concept, you know, I guess that's part of the layers in harmony.
Yike. I mean,
I shouldn't be irreverent because I have a lot of respect for what's happening here.
Well, who I respect is Jeff Bannister, who gave us $5.
Oh yeah,
Canadian
can't watch
here.
now. I'll be back to watch it later. Good.
Yes.
It will be worth watching.
Thank you, Jeff.
Because we're not only going to wrap this up, I'm going to give my personal perspective on what's being said here and what we should take from it. And then we're going to read a few things that might get us in a better place. So,
okay, good.
So yes, thank
One
you.
more clip?
And the link has been posted. So the final clip, that was the penultimate clip for people who know what penultimate means. I do. Brag, brag, brag. The final clip here.
Yes.
Oh man, I went to this bar in Nashville. This band was playing Kelly's Heroes, a great guitarist, best guitarist I've ever seen. Everybody in the crowd, it was so fun to be there. They're just thrilled to death because they're watching this man doing the same thing that surfers do. He's like dancing on the edge of chaos and order in this virtuosic manner. And everyone is so taken by that it just lifts them out of the normality of their existence. You see this joy just transfuse them. And that's because they got an intimation of genuine meaning. And it's not amenable to rational criticism, which is the thing that I thought that struck me as so miraculous about music, and why it has this element of salvation. It's like it puts you directly in touch with the meaning that sustains you in life directly. And it shows you what that would be, which is something like to observe the harmonious interplay of the patterns of being stacked on top of one another, and then to bring yourself into alignment with that, which is what yogis strive to do, and what disciplined athletes strive to do, and what we celebrate in athletics. And it's all a reflection of the same thing. And that's real. It's real, that meaning.
That's real. That's the stuff.
Well, then.
Now
so you were saying earlier that he is searching for meaning.
Yes.
And he's finding this meaning, or this intimation, or this implication of meaning that doesn't necessarily have words to it, because they're just patterns interconnecting, and you can only speak about things that are real in terms of patterns. And
these folks listening to this band, listening to this guitar player do this solo, in which he reaches into the many layers, the communication between levels of melody and harmony and sound itself and performance. He's riding the edge, because he's improvising. Yes. He's riding that edge between order and chaos. And people are seeing that. They're coming into the experience. He sees that moment, and he's visibly choked up. Right. Which I love. I love to see people who reach that stage of really being so in touch with their values that it's very difficult to even keep control of the level of emotion. But, Leonard Peikoff did an episode of the Peikoff podcast. He did the radio show too. He did this on both, right, in which he talked about, he entitled it Tears at a Wedding.
Yes, Tears at a Wedding.
He asked the question, why do we cry at weddings? Why do we get choked up? A wedding is a happy event. It's a joyous event. Why would there be anything but smiles and joyfulness? And when we talked about it, folks who've seen this know, we took a little bit of issue with that. I think there are instances in which the overwhelm of emotion does not necessarily betray what Leonard said, which is the overwhelming feeling that life isn't really like that. He explicitly pointed to the malevolent universe premise and said that's what people are experiencing is malevolence, that life should be like this, but it isn't. And my reaction at the time was, of course, he's right. Leonard is always right. But I don't know if he was always right. I think that there are occasions where it simply transcends your regular level of happiness, and you're not feeling like, oh, life should be like this all the time. You're simply saying it's more than I can process.
Right. It's an overwhelm of emotion.
Yes.
Of joyous emotion.
Yeah.
And I felt that for sure.
But if I ever had an example,
yes,
in which I absolutely agree with Leonard Peikoff, that overwhelming emotion is mixed with the sense of why the hell isn't life like this more often?
Right.
That's what I got from that clip. From seeing Jordan Peterson re-experience this passion, this joy that he felt in being part of a crowd that was enjoying this great musician riding that wave, that line between order and chaos. My answer to Jordan Peterson, why you felt that, what you were feeling. It wasn't that you were communing with the layers. Well, metaphorically, that is actually what it was. What was really happening was the primary object, the real object, not the layers, not the abstractions, not the higher level concepts, but the actual real object, you, here on earth in reality.
Right now.
We're experiencing the one thing that should make you feel overwhelmed at your most joyous times, and that is the experience of life as an end in itself. I've read chapter 11 from Anthem before on the show, not the whole chapter, just the opening to it. And I'll read it again right now, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong about it. Anthem, which incidentally, there's a link in the show notes if you haven't read Anthem yet, nor haven't read it in a while. Unfortunately, it fell out of copyright. As I recall, when the folks in Britain, where it was first published, failed to renew their US copyright. So you can actually read it at Project Gutenberg. I, of course, have, I don't know how many paper, dead tree copies of it. Chapter 11, Anthem by Ayn Rand. I am. I think. I will. My hands, my spirit, my sky, my forest, this earth of mine. What must I say besides? These are the words. This is the answer. I stand here on the summit of the mountain. I lift my head and I spread my arms. This, my body and spirit. This is the end of the quest. I wished to know the meaning of things. I am the meaning. I wished to find a warrant for being. I need no warrant for being, and no word of sanction upon my being. I am the warrant and the sanction. And it goes on from there. I believe that's what Jordan Peterson was experiencing at that concert. I think it's what he's experiencing when he gets choked up on a podcast and talks about it. That experience of this moment is worth living for its own sake. And I have the right to do that. And it is right that I do that. In the book Letters of Ayn Rand, they gathered the letters that Ayn Rand sent out. She would usually keep copies of all of her correspondence, or sometimes correspondence would come back to her and she would file it. And she wrote a letter to a fan, August 29th, 1960. Dear Mr. Williams, to R.A. Williams, a fan. Thank you for your letter of August 10th. I will tell you frankly that yours is one of the few letters that I liked very much. I am glad that Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead have helped you philosophically. I hope you will understand and accept my philosophy fully, and if I understand you correctly, that you will never give up on the values you once held. You asked me about the meaning of the dialogue on page 702 of Atlas Shrugged. Quote, "We never had to take any of it seriously, did we?" she whispered. No, we never had to. Let me begin by saying this is perhaps the most important point in the whole book, because it is the condensed emotional summation, the keynote or leitmotif of the view of life presented in Atlas Shrugged. What Dagny expresses here is the conviction that joy, exaltation, beauty, greatness, heroism, all the supreme uplifting values of man's existence on earth are the meaning of life, not the pain or ugliness he may encounter. And one must live for the sake of such exalted moments as one may be able to achieve or experience, not for the sake of suffering. That happiness matters, but suffering does not. That no matter how much pain one may have to endure, it is never to be taken seriously. That is, never to be taken as the essence and meaning of life. That the essence of life is the achievement of joy, not the escape from pain. Letter goes on a little longer. If you don't have a copy of Letters of Ayn Rand, you should, and a link to that is also in the show notes.
Yeah, so what do we know so far, Robert? Yeah, because I mean, we've covered a lot, and we've covered a lot of malevolent universe premises. We've covered the idea that you know, how can you hold values as a human being, conceptual human being, if you do not value objectivity? Yeah. So
again, when Rucka is doing a series with Dr. Rines, Jason Rines, and they've been discussing Kantianism. And Jason's great because he brings home why so many regard Kant as an Enlightenment philosopher.
Right.
Because he made a lot of points that have been used in support of free markets and even in support of reason. He wrote a whole book about reason, 2 whole books about reason. But as Dr. Rines has made clear too, Kant did hold that belief that there are things that we know intellectually, and there are things that we know based on our experience in the real world. And it's clear that the noumenal world, the world of abstractions, the world of ideas, the world of what's really out there above and beyond what our senses give us, or our experiences give us, has primacy. It's the real world over the phenomenal world, the world of phenomena, the stuff that we encounter day to day. And that was enough for Ayn Rand to call Immanuel Kant the most evil philosopher in history. And that is exactly what I see Jordan Peterson and other intellectuals doing when they say what matters, what has primacy, what's real are the layers upon layers of abstractions, are the ways in which those layers communicate with each other. Not the individual, not the musician, not even the notes, not the instruments. Now, the way it all comes together is beautiful. The way it all comes together, the way in which people come together is magnificent. But it's not primary. It's not the fundamental. And none of that other stuff has any meaning without the units. So when he says the things of the world come together, and then he goes back and says, well, the things, no, it's the patterns, it's the way they come together that matters.
Yeah, that is so, I mean, that's taking Platonism to, and rationalism to greater heights.
Well, it's taking it seriously.
Yes.
When people, you listen to philosophy, and well, I'm a Platonist, and you think, oh, well, that's kind of funny, because of course he can't possibly really be a Platonist. Nobody really believes that stuff. And then you hear a very intelligent person say, and so what's the world? Well, the world's made of objects? No, it's not. It's made of patterns. And he's not just saying that metaphorically or to kind of reinforce a higher point, because it's consistent with everything else that he says when he goes south, and you think, what is this man thinking? Listen to his conversation on what is truth with Sam Harris, and he says flat out that truth is not correspondence with the facts of reality. Because if those truths do not foster mankind's evolution and survival, then they're not true.
I mean, putting aside the evolutionary aspect of his thinking, in terms of that topic, it just sounds like he is so misintegrated that, and he kind of relishes the misintegrations of his thoughts, and he's constantly thinking in terms of patterns and the relationships, and it just seems like he wants to someday, after all of his suffering, after all of his mental suffering, he just wants to be bopped on the head by God, and then all of these abstractions upon abstractions are going to actually make sense, because this is what's the word, divine intervention, not the in terms of getting knowledge from a supernatural power, which means a word that I can't think of, but that's the kind of thing that he seems to be driving at.
And that may well be. He's certainly made statements recently that indicate that he no longer regards himself as an atheist, which he did for several years.
Right.
He's always talked about religion. He's always talked about the religious myth and mythology and history, because he thinks that's the stuff. But lately, he's going all out. In one of his recent podcasts, he said that the Bible is the book. And what he means by that is it's the first, in fact, he says literally, it's the first book. And when people have pointed out to them, well, there were books before that, there were scrolls, the Bible itself is based on earlier books. He said, no, this is the first book that brought it all together. In other words, that created these patterns, this network, this weaving. And to him, everything comes out of the Bible and goes into the Bible. Everything is connected to the Bible. There's no single explanation for civilization that's more all explaining than the Bible. And yeah, he's slowly returning to religion, which again should be no surprise if you've, and I certainly have followed his last few years.
Yeah, and this goes well into KFAX, who has sent us a wonderful super chat for $9.99. He says, some of my peers went from religious at youth from upbringing, nihilistic in early adulthood, then religious again.
There you go.
There's something to that pattern that I think Peterson appeals to.
That's right on the money. Exactly so. And again, one of the reasons I can't, there are several, but one of the reasons I can't resist bringing it up is because it's just, when you hear objectivists in particular talk about other philosophers and say, oh yeah, they're disconnected from reality, they disassociate, they don't understand the objectivist epistemology, they have no grounding of their concepts with their percepts, or they distrust percepts because the stick appears bent in water and they only believe in sensation. And we think, well, nobody really believes that stuff. Nobody really thinks that way because they still wake up in the morning and brush their teeth and eat some breakfast and go in a car and count on reality and reason all day, every day, in everything that they do. And yet, this sense of, oh, we've got to somehow connect with the transcendent or with the order in the universe, not the things that make order, not the actual elements or people, but the order itself. And, ride that line between order and chaos.
How lost that he is.
Yeah. And then I go back to the Fountainhead and I read Gil Winan saying, I was thinking of people who say that happiness is impossible on earth. Look how hard they all try to find some joy in life. Look how they struggle for it. Why should any living creature exist in pain? By what conceivable right can anyone demand that a human being exist for anything but his own joy? Every one of them wants it. Every part of him wants it, but they never find it. I wonder why. Then Howard Rourke answers him. He says, look, Gail. Rourke got up, reached out, tore a thick branch off a tree, held it in both hands, one fist clenched at each end, then his wrists and knuckles tensed against the resistance. He bent the branch slowly into an arc. Now I can make what I want of it. A bow, a spear, a cane, a railing. That's the meaning of life. Your strength, your work. He tossed the branch aside. The material the earth offers you and what you make of it.
Now that's excellent. I mean, going back to the meaning of life, and it needs to be centered around your own life. It needs to be centered around your means of cognition, your means of survival, which is your reason. And to stray away from that, and why, personally, Jordan Peterson strays away from that. We certainly have our theories, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with the fact that he is like Bonnie says in here, that he's
gone through hell. He's gone through hell and back.
Well, he is his emotions are in the driver's seat, as Bonnie put it so aptly.
It would be rude for me to speculate much further, but given that final clip, I think the evidence speaks for itself. The man has been through a lot, and he's unbelievably intelligent. The more you listen to him, the more you're like, the horsepower this guy has between his ears to come up with this stuff. But he has built a universe, or as he would call it, maps of meaning, and he now thinks the map is reality.
Yeah.
We've talked about the meaning of life before. It was funny, the one time when it might have been the last time we talked about it, and John the corrector, when I said, life, Ayn Rand's definition of life is a process of self-sustaining and self-generated action. And he corrected me and said, no, that wasn't her definition. That's not a definition. So you're right. That was her description of life. Life is a process of self-sustaining, self-generated action. What is the meaning of life? So if you want a definition, the condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter, including the capacity for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and continual change preceding death. or a life can be an instance of the above, a specific plant or animal, including a rational animal like you or me. Now, obviously, when we say, what's the meaning of life? People are seeking more than the meaning of the word, the definition. What they're looking for, what we are looking for, is the why, the purpose, the reason for being, the raison d'etre. In that case, the answer is when two people meet and they fall in love and they come together in a very special way, and 9 months later, well, there you are. Okay, that can't be the only reason. That is the reason for being. That's why you are here. No, when I say, why am I here? It's not just my parents got busy. Well, then if that why, that reason for being isn't enough, what reason do we have for wanting to be? Why do we keep asking, what is this desire we have? Well, there's two possibilities. Possibility number one, meaning for life. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? Why are you here? Number one, you exist, you continue to live, you continue to satisfy all the requirements of life because your life is an end in itself. It is rich with values and value experiences that are worth living for their own sake.
Mm-hmm.
Possibility number two, something else that has nothing to do with reality, something transcendent, something bigger than you. And I think we yearn for more because we yearn for more. We do it because we do it. We do it because we've always done it. That is, we yearn for a transcendent meaning, a purpose beyond ourselves, something bigger than ourselves. Because we yearn for meaning and purpose in our actual day-to-day, here on earth activities. The things we actually do and experience and create and produce and imagine and plan and submit to and celebrate and love, the actual stuff of life. And unfortunately, many of us, perhaps most of us, are not brought up with this perspective. We're brought up with that wish that this magnificent life will never end. That wish, that fantasy is validated and encouraged. And sometimes I meet people who weren't brought up with that. People who don't have that yearning, who understand from day one that life is both precious and finite, and whose lust for life, their joie de vivre, is simple and strong and without angst. And knowing and encountering people like that helps me reaffirm that in myself. As Kira's Viking said, to a life that is an end unto itself. So I would love to meet Jordan Peterson, give him a great big hug and say, man, you're too smart to be tied up in the map you created.
Right.
The map's great. Use the map. Apply the map, because that's what maps are for. The map isn't reality. The map is a map of reality.
Well, he's just somebody who is so disconnected from himself, from his. He's searching for something outside of himself when the answer is within him, within his own thought. You know, he takes these emotional, as the words I failed to come up with before, is divine revelation, these emotional divine revelations, as something not to be questioned, not to be introspected upon, not to go back and ask himself, you know, what concepts, what information led me to have this emotion? What are the thoughts behind this emotion? You know, and all he can, I mean, what a mess. all he can come up with is patterns that communicate with each other as a way of trying to grapple with the idea of what made him feel those emotions. That is so, it's so very convoluted and very sad. And yeah, I don't know if I would give him a hug, but I don't know, maybe, I don't know, give him some chocolate or something.
I missed some of the chat while I was talking, but I happen to notice where Jose says, is he anything like Dominique, I wonder? And it's funny that you mentioned that, because if you look at the show notes, which are posted on Facebook, they're linked on my Twitter, you can look at them all after the show. One of the videos that I linked to is him addressing the meaning of life. And what does he bring up in that context? The problem of evil.
Mm-hmm.
And his answer to the problem of evil is, you've got to take, he doesn't use these words, but you'll hear it if you listen to the clip. You've got to take extreme ownership. You've got to take responsibility for everything that happens to you. Well, I've advocated extreme ownership. We did an episode called Extreme Ashtray. If you haven't seen my episode called Extreme Ashtray, look it up on YouTube. But he makes it metaphysical.
Mm-hmm.
He includes, and he points out that this is a Jewish tradition. He includes metaphysical, like illness or accidents, that you take responsibility for those too, because there are reasons why those happen to you. The universe and you are tied together in that way, and you have responsibility even for the metaphysical things that happen to you. And he has to do that, given where he's coming from. It doesn't occur to him to say, well, there are accidents in the universe that nobody was responsible for, bad things are going to happen. Because he says, well, like we said in the Extreme Ashtray episode, if you take responsibility for everything, well, I would say it puts you in the driver's seat. What he would say is that gives you great solace by knowing that it's not just stuff happening to you, that you are bringing this on yourself. Well, to me, that's just a recipe for unearned guilt. But if you hold a malevolent view of the universe and you're trying to escape that, it's a lot easier to say, well, the universe is neither malevolent nor benevolent, but rather it's giving you back everything that you've put into it. Well, obviously I believe in justice. Obviously, I'm sympathetic to the idea of karma if we're applying it to the man-made, not the metaphysical. But anyway, to that question, is he anything like Dominique? And there is no question, I'm trying not to be rude to Jordan, but I don't think it's unfair to say he's got a malevolent streak. And the more that I watch him and read his stuff,
it goes back to when you were in the beginning of our show today, you talked about he has a hard time differentiating between the metaphysical and the man-made.
Yes. And he has a hard time even discerning the metaphysical, because again, he believes that higher level abstractions are what's real.
Right.
And that's where the action is. That's where the meaning is to be found. Now, I certainly express meaning in high level abstractions, but I don't take them as primaries. I'm the primary. You're the primary. You are the primary. So
yeah,
I will be exploring this issue further, not necessarily giving Jordan Peterson a hard time about it, but we've talked about meaning before. We've talked about purpose before. We are far, far from done, because we are talking about life on Earth. So thank you for joining us. This for me has been
and the meaning of life, which is I really like that quote with Winan and Rourke, and he said, Winan says, your strength, is that the meaning of life? And he said, no, your work.
Exactly the kind of thing Winan would say.
Why would Winan say your strength?
For the same reason that somebody very close to me once said, I don't think Ayn Rand was fair to Gail Winan in that book.
But is Gail Winan talking about strength in terms of comparing himself to other people, or stronger than other people kind of thing? Or is he talking about your physical muscles? I mean, or is he not connecting the mind to the body there?
That's what it is. He's not quite connecting the mind to the body. Remember, Gail Winan is a borderline hero.
Right.
He's also a villain. Gail Winan understands strength. He doesn't tie it to efficacy.
Right.
In the sense that we've talked about efficacy, masculinity, femininity, being grounded and connected to the world. To Gail Wine, strength means power.
Mm-hmm.
To Howard Rourke, strength means efficacy.
Yeah.
Not what can you do, but what can you do? What can you make happen? What can you create? What can you produce?
And I also love what Howard Rourke says to Peter Keating, and he says, you must love the doing.
You must love the doing.
And that's
right.
as simple as that. Your values aren't necessarily one particular goal. It's the actual, what you're doing to get there. And you have to love that journey. You have to love that process.
Yes. So I would say that we did a whole episode on things that get you choked up in the good way. That's a great episode to listen to, but you don't need to listen to it. Just find them. Find that music, like Jordan Peterson identifies, that puts you in touch with the fact that your life is an end in itself. That music you listen to where you say, I could die after this song is over, as long as this is how life ends. This is an end in itself. This makes life worth living. Find that dance partner and go out and dance. Find that movie that you love so much. If you're in a romance, well, you know what to do that is an end in itself, and experience those moments, because that is why Jordan Peterson got choked up remembering those moments, because life is an end in itself. And whether he identifies it or not, he experiences it, I experience it, and you should experience it. So thank you for joining us on Life on Earth. We're going to go over to Clubhouse and talk to you some more.
Thanks,
you
everybody.
can bring it on.